Safety is a major concern at PPL. We all know that power plants have inherent hazards associated with them, and maintaining an accident-free environment doesn't just happen. It requires safety awareness, planning, and commitment from start to finish. In this program, you'll learn about security check-in procedures, personal protective equipment, warning signs and labels, hot work permits, respiratory and lead hazards, waste generation and spill control, PPL's energy control process, confined space procedures, electrical safety awareness, equipment use and operation, communication and reporting requirements, and emergency action plans. By following OSHA standards and the guidelines presented in this video, you'll go a long way toward preventing accidents. As a contractor, you must be aware that while you're working at a PPL facility, you're responsible for the safety of your employees as well as anyone else that may be affected by your actions. Entrance onto the Colstrip steam electric station requires checking in at the security gate. The security team will issue a contractor badge, inspect vehicles and inventory, and will contact your contract representative. The security team will also brief you on the evacuation locations and provide a map of the Colstrip steam electric station. Keep your badge with you at all times. It will help with identification and is needed in the event of an evacuation. For your safety and the safety of our employees, no illegal or illicit drugs, alcohol, or weapons will be allowed on the Colstrip steam electric station plant site. Once on site, any potential hazards associated with your project will be discussed during a pre-job meeting and walkthrough with your PPL contact person. We'll begin by taking a look at some of the personal protective equipment that's required while working in certain areas at PPL. As a contractor working for PPL, you're responsible for providing proper personal protective equipment for your employees, including safety shoes, hard hats, hearing and hand protection, and industrial eyewear. For areas requiring respirator use, it's necessary for you to make sure all your employees are respirator qualified per OSHA regulations. If there is concern about the possibility of a respiratory hazard, your contact person will attempt to identify the hazard, determine whether or not it can be eliminated, and specify the proper respiratory equipment to wear if it can't be eliminated. To alert you and your employees to the required personal protective equipment necessary at your job site, warning signs and labels are posted throughout PPL power plants for your protection. In addition to warning signs and labels, there are numerous audible alarms throughout the plant site. These alarms alert you to equipment starts, high water temperature, hydrazine high limits, overhead mobile crane, and other situations in the plant that may require immediate attention. If you hear an audible alarm and have questions, ask your on-site contact person. Before work is initiated in any plant system with a high fire risk potential, PPL's hot work permit must be utilized. The objective of the hot work permit is to prevent fires from occurring by preventing ignition sources from reaching combustible or flammable materials that are stored or released, and by preventing released combustible and/or flammable materials from reaching ignition sources, including open flames, sparks, high-temperature steam piping, and electrical sources. The hot work permit will highlight the recognized fire hazard and outline possible controls that will be put in place to prevent a fire event. All combustible materials within 35 feet of the affected area must either be removed or properly protected from ignition sources. All PPL generation work groups, including contractors, shall be responsible for adhering to the hot work permit when doing work on site. Additionally, smoking is not allowed in any building on the plant site. Smoking is allowed only in designated smoking areas. While working at PPL, your job may be performed in certain areas containing coal dust. This dust is created in the coal handling process and can pose a significant threat if not properly managed. In addition to the use of respiratory protection, other precautions must be taken. Smoking and open flames are not permitted in areas subject to coal dust. Electrical equipment must be classified for use in hazardous dust environments. Dust ignition-proof devices are also required. You should follow OSHA standards with respect to operations that involve brazing, cutting, and welding. Fly ash is another type of dust you should be aware of while working at PPL. Fly ash contains silica and trace amounts of arsenic. Areas that may contain fly ash include the penthouse, boiler, gas passes, air heaters, and fly ash hoppers. Another concern while working in a power plant is asbestos exposure. Asbestos is a naturally occurring fibrous material. In power plants, it has been used for a variety of applications, including asbestos cement board, insulation on cables, cable tray penetrations, pipe insulation, and gaskets. Asbestos can be hazardous if it becomes airborne and friable, and is inhaled. If insulation is not marked and there is no clear documentation that the material is non-asbestos, it should be treated as asbestos-containing material. Warning signs are posted at locations where asbestos has been identified, but is not expected to become friable or airborne. And warning labels are placed on all bagged waste. Exposure to lead is another hazard you should be aware of. Pure lead combined with various other substances forms numerous lead compounds. It was used in lead-based paints, roofs, electrical conduits, wire, tank linings, pipes, and soft solder. Some examples of operations that generate lead dust and fumes include flame torch cutting, welding and grinding of lead-based painted surfaces, abrasive blasting of bridges and other steel structures containing lead-based paints, using torches, heat guns, and sanding machines for removal of lead-based paints, maintaining process equipment or exhaust ductwork, and operations that involve exposure to lead-containing products. Prior to the removal of any lead-containing material, a sample is taken and testing is completed. If you're unsure if the product you're working with contains lead, assume it does, and your PPL contact person should be notified immediately. Unless you are assigned to work in the area, you should stay away from sections marked for lead exposure. You should also be aware that chromium is present in stainless and other alloy steels used in high-temperature boiler components, including boiler tubes, burner boxes, and header pipes, as well as in other metal components such as various types of piping and tubing, fan ductwork, and valves. Performing hot work activities such as welding, burning, and torch cutting on any of these components or equipment may generate fumes that contain airborne hexavalent chromium. Hexavalent chromium is regulated by a specific OSHA standard at a permissible exposure limit of 5 micrograms per cubic meter of air. Whenever possible, fumes from hot work are to be controlled through the use of exhaust ventilation, including boiler ventilation systems, or other local fume control equipment. If effective exhaust ventilation cannot be applied, contractors are required to advise PPL prior to performing work that may create ambient airborne levels of hexavalent chromium in excess of the OSHA permissible exposure level. Without effective exhaust ventilation, any area that has the potential to exceed the OSHA limit must be properly marked as a hexavalent chromium regulated area. Respirators, employee medicals, and other administrative elements may be required when conducting hot work in these areas. Any chemicals brought on site must go through PPL's chemical screening process. This is coordinated through each plant's safety, health, and environmental supervisor. As a contractor, you must furnish a material safety data sheet for each approved product, and all chemicals must be properly labeled and marked. This label must include the manufacturer's name and address, the chemical name of the product, and specific hazard warnings. This applies to any chemical present in the workplace to which employees may be exposed to under normal or emergency conditions. In addition, the MSDS for every chemical must be kept on site, in a convenient location, and available for everyone's access. The proper handling, transporting, and disposing of wastes generated on the job site is your responsibility while working at PPL. It's important that you don't mix hazardous waste with non-hazardous waste. Mixing the two will cause the whole amount to be classified hazardous. All waste drums should be properly marked and labeled. Remember, when your job is finished, it's your responsibility to remove all waste and chemicals from the job site. Another concern for PPL contractors is a chemical spill that may be caused by you or one of your workers. If this should occur, certain steps must be taken. First, every effort should be made to prevent the material from reaching floor or storm drains. Absorbent materials are available at different locations throughout each facility. Next, your PPL contact person should be notified as to what product is involved and the location of the spill. While performing your work, it may be necessary to remove or shut down a system or piece of equipment for maintenance. Should this occur, it is important that PPL's energy control process be followed. The first step in this process is an electronic clearance request made by one of PPL's authorized personnel, such as an engineer, planner, supervisor, or mechanic. A clearance order is then electronically generated. The clearance order identifies the system or equipment to be removed from service and defines the isolation boundary to be applied. An isolation boundary can be comprised of one or more energy isolating devices, EIDs, that are positioned to restrict the passage of energy into a work area. This boundary isolates the system or piece of equipment on which work will be performed. Energy isolating devices, EIDs, are locked out and tagged out and mean do not operate. They are placed and removed only by specifically authorized PPL personnel. When a red lock and tag is in place, the device is in a controlled status and should not be repositioned or moved for any reason. Locked out and tagged out EIDs cannot be worked on or removed from their respective plant system. Your PPL contact person is an authorized ECP holder who will offer you protection by making sure you know and understand your exact limits and boundaries within the process. Now we'll take a look at PPL's confined space procedures. Some examples of a confined space are manholes, tanks, vessels, silos, storage bins, hoppers, vaults, and pits. There are three different categories of confined spaces: a permit-required confined space, a non-permit required confined space, and an enclosed space. OSHA requires that all employees involved in confined space work are trained with respect to entrance procedures. A confined space entry documentation form must be used for all confined space work. Proper adherence to these rules and restrictions will assure the safety of you and your employees while working in these spaces at PPL. Electrical safety awareness regulations apply to employees who face a risk of electrical shock as a result of working in or near manholes and/or vaults, exposed internal building wiring, outside premises wiring such as parking lots, substations or switch yards, and downed wires. All electrical equipment at PPL has rating nameplates. These nameplates provide a great variety of information useful to electrical personnel. Workers who are not trained on exposed, energized electrical equipment must stay back the minimum distances from any energized electric facility with exposed live parts. They must also wear basic personal protective items appropriate to the work areas. If you're in question whether a facility is energized or de-energized, or if you can't identify the exposed live parts of equipment, do not enter the facility. You should also be aware that certain electrical equipment has the potential for arc flash. Authorized workers must use special personal protective equipment to prevent exposure while working on these components. In order to protect personnel, PPL uses warning signs and flagging to establish arc flash boundaries. Do not enter these areas. Equipment use and operation safety standards must be strictly adhered to when working at a PPL worksite. As a contractor, you must make sure that forklifts, cranes, mobile equipment, and vehicles are operated by trained, competent, or licensed operators, and that seatbelts are worn. All equipment, machinery, hand and power tools, as well as rigging and hoisting gear, must be maintained in safe working condition and used in the correct application. All scaffold and ladder use shall be done in accordance with OSHA standards, and proper fall protection must be provided and worn when required. Only competent personnel may erect, dismantle, and alter scaffolds. Communication and record keeping is also important to your safety. Toolbox safety meetings are essential at the beginning of a project and should be conducted on a weekly basis. As conditions change with a project, make sure to keep your employees informed. Remember, these procedures are in place for your protection and must be followed. Every PPL facility has an emergency action plan in place. These plans outline the steps to be followed during the unlikely event of a plant emergency, including fires, explosions, or a hazardous material release. The emergency notification system at the Colstrip steam electric station is tested weekly, and prior to testing, all on-site personnel are notified. In the event of an injury, accident, fire, or other situation where emergency response assistance is needed, follow the Colstrip emergency procedure. Colstrip has a Guytronics paging system on Units 1 and 2, and a 311 emergency phone number on Units 3 and 4. Remember in an emergency to stay calm, identify yourself, and state your emergency and physical location using elevation, column numbers, phone extension, or any other identifier. The PPL Montana personnel who answers the phone or page shall be responsible for initiating the required assistance. If an emergency event were to occur at the Colstrip steam electric station, the first point of gathering will be the group's normal work assembly area. This area is referred to as the initial assembly area. The immediate leader of each work group shall then account for all personnel in his or her group. If evacuation is required, the point of assembly will be announced over the paging system along with an audible evacuation siren. For accountability, you will be required to badge in at the evacuation card reader located at the designated evacuation site. Remember, these procedures are in place for your protection and must be followed. At PPL, our primary goal is the safety of our employees and all others in our facilities. No job you do or service you perform is so urgent that you cannot take the time and use the necessary equipment to do it safely. While you're working at a PPL site, your work will be monitored and your safety performance will be documented. Adhering to the rules outlined in this program will help to ensure your safety and continued success as a PPL contractor.